Hey, welcome to PopCast, a crowd-sponsored Yo-Yo show. Huge shout out to John Anderson, Taka from Spin Gear, Dr. Lucky, and the rest of my sponsors over on patreon.com/DocPop for making this show possible. Each episode of PopCast, we talk about something yo-yo related, oftentimes a yo-yo move. Today I'm going to talk to you about comics and yo-yos. I'm going to talk to Carl Angel, who is the illustrator of Pedro's Yo-Yos, a really cool story about Pedro Flores and the creation of the modern yo-yo. I actually interviewed Carl, and we're going to show some clips of that later on in this episode.
When I was looking at the images, it looked like I was looking at kung fu stills or something like that, because people were just like this and they're like this.
And I'm going to talk to you about my new book, The Little Book of Yo-Yo.
Little Book of Yo-Yo.
This is a comic book that I made as part of a 24-hour comic book jam. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to interview Carl. But first, let's just talk about comics and yo-yos. Before yo-yos, which I got into on my 21st birthday, comics were one of my biggest hobbies. And you might have seen in the background here, I always have a bunch of comics here. This is my comic book shelf. Here, let me get you a closer look. So there is a little bit of a theme going on here. For some reason, there's New Mutants up top, which I guess is because New Mutants had such an important role on me. I keep it on top of all my others. But for the most part, we've got our tall books, a lot of unusual taller books, a lot of art books, things like that. You know, Akira art book and Jeremy Fish art book. Joe Sacco books kind of closer to each other. Scott McCloud books closer to each other. Adrian Tomine. Collection of Chick Tracks by Jack Chick. This is one of my favorite comic creators. This is Jason Shiga. His book, Meanwhile, dude, this is a choose your own, he calls it adventure game. This is a crazy book. He also did another one called Knock Knock. And meanwhile, the first thing you do is pick which flavor ice cream you want. And in Knock Knock, the first thing you do is answer the door when a serial killer is knocking on the door, and you don't survive your first encounter usually. These are awesome. Jason Shiga, remember that name. Understanding Mini Comics, kind of inspired by Understanding Comics, but this is a bunch of funny kind of parodies of that. And one of the smallest little comics I have currently, this guy's so small, it's a zine. So that is most of my graphic novels, but today we're going to talk about yo-yo comics. So we're going to look at these guys right here. One book I probably did read when I was younger was Punisher, because I was like really into Marvel and superhero comics. This issue of Punisher, issue number 50, giant 50th issue, features Yo-Yo. It features a character named Yo-Yo. First appearance of Yo-Yo. What's that, Boingy Boing? Now, there is this myth that you've probably heard that yo-yo was invented in the Philippines as a weapon. There's nothing showing that there has ever been a yo-yo used as a weapon. No one went hunting with yo-yos. That wasn't happening. There was a big Filipino connection to yo-yoing and modern yo-yoing, which we'll talk about in Pedro Flores' book. But in this issue, Punisher, issue 50th, we have a character named Yo-Yo who is an assassin who uses a yo-yo as a weapon. Ooh, razor blade yo-yo. Oh, that's so dorky. I love it. As a kid, I didn't yo-yo. As a kid, I read a lot of comics. I grew up on New Mutants and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and pretty much anything other with mutants in it. And so I'm really happy to see books like this by Gail Galligan. This is a book for kids. It's about a group of kids who are in a dance crew. I mean, this is just such a pretty book. But the dance crew founder, they're competing in battles, and he decides he needs to pick out something new. And the team's like, no, you gotta go with safe stuff. You need to go with safe routines. We keep trying experimental. And he's like, no, we need to have something different. And he gets into yo-yoing, and he learns through yo-yoing how to practice and how to be experimental, but also like learn and take time and not just dive into new things. This is an adorable book. The girl on the cover, she helps teach him how to yo-yo and tutors him in life. This is a really fun book. It's a yo-yo book. It's a yo-yo comic. It's massive. It's cool art. This is a cool one. Tragic Fantastic by Rob Armin. This is a story. It's drawn in pencils. It's a really cool style. The pencils are upped in contrast, but it kind of gives you this really textural feel. It looks like you're kind of looking at the artist's paper. Work in progress kind of thing is really neat. The art in here is so expressive. Rob is just a master with these illustrations. Really taking advantage of the art form and kind of keeping the pacing and stuff going in really interesting directions. I love his faces. They're so expressive. This is a really cool book. Tragic, fantastic. I think this is available online. I'll try to include a link to it as well. Rob also sent me this genie or Jin with a yo-yo. Really cool stuff. Thank you, Rob. And then this is a really special piece in my collection. This is a 3-page comic by Paul Escolar. You don't usually see stuff Xeroxed like this, like photocopied this size. But yeah, he gifted this to me a long time ago. Paul Escolar was a legend in the yo-yo community who passed away a few years ago. But this was, he made this in like 2002 or something. And this is a story about someone waiting for a package. I always kind of thought, is this me, this kind of pathetic looking loser with like, he looked a lot like I did, I guess, back in the day. Or maybe Spencer Berry was the model. I don't know. But like, yeah, this kind of loser waiting for some delivery. It looks like maybe like a drug delivery. Knock on the door as he's yo-yoing. Here's that one yo-yo scene, right? Because Paul was a yo-yoer, and I'm talking about yo-yo comics. And then he gets greeted with the package and assassinated for some reason. I believe Paul was in art school. I don't know for sure, but I think Paul was in art school, and I think this was like an art school project. I love it. I cherished it. Once he gave it to me, I was like, dude, I want to make a book with you. And it's never happened, but I don't think he was that into sequential art, but seeing Paul do sequential art was really cool for me because that's the only time I've ever seen him do that. Not really a comic, but this is just pretty cool. This is the CLY zine. I just think it's pretty awesome. It's a zine. One more piece of yo-yo artwork from my friend Peter, who also has a Patreon. This is just me yo-yoing. I really dig it. This is the newest in my collection. This is Yo by 1%, I believe is his name, from Japan. Let's Yo-Yo. Sorry, it's called Let's Yo-Yo, the Yo-Yo Beginner's Guide. This is amazing. I don't know how easy this is to get, but every page is this kind of, not graffiti style, doodle style kind of art. This is such a cool book. Again, going in heavily on the instructions and tutorials. I really like how the papers change color. So he just used black and white, but he's able to kind of keep the book feeling colorful by switching color papers throughout the book. And he's got really cool, splash pages and stuff like that. Really cool diagrams. I actually traded for this comic. That's part of the comic culture is if you make comics and zines, you tend to trade with other people. This was a trade. Thanks so much, 1%, for sharing this with me. I hope you enjoy the books I sent you as well. And speaking of yo-yo comics, we've got these, the Duncan Yo-Yo books. And these are really cool because they actually used the art form of comics to teach how to yo-yo. They almost look like Sunday comics, something you would see published in a newspaper. The style is great, really solid style. Oh, I thought that was a hat. It's a yo-yo wrapped around his head. Whatever, okay. So you got this guy, and then you have this character here that also appears in Duncan's stuff. A very stylized version of yo-yoing. So I have a few of these Duncan books. I do like this style, this kind of era of Duncan's work. This is 1960. This one was a little later, 1961. This is a bigger book. It is called The Giant Book of Duncan Yo-Yo. And it talks about how to put the string on your finger and how to wind the yo-yo and how to do your first tricks. This was actually a huge inspiration for the Little Book of Yo-Yo.
Little Book of Yo-Yo.
Well, it starts off with a story about an orphan getting a yo-yo as part of a last will and testament. It's the only thing he gets. And then I helpfully come by and help him, learn how to use this new toy. There's this event called the 24-Hour Comic Book Day. It happens once a year, usually in October. The goal is to create a 24-page comic in 24 consecutive hours without any planning in advance. You don't have any planning, you just come with your materials, that clock starts, and you start drawing. And you try not to finish until you reach 24 pages, and you try to reach 24 pages before the 24 hours are up. You can take breaks, you can do something like you want, but the clock's still running. Now, I've done, I think, 10 of these. The Little Book of Yo-Yo was actually made at a 24-hour comic day in San Francisco at Mission Comics. Back in 2009, I reached out to a bunch of friends and said, hey, you're into comics, you should try a 24-hour comic book day. And Oke Rizgana from Indonesia said, okay, I want to do it. Oke, in 2009, did the 24-hour comic book challenge, and he did a book called The Magic Yo-Yo, which is just gorgeous. And remember, each one of these pages was done in that 24-hour period with no planning in advance. So you can kind of say each page was about 1 hour of writing, penciling, drawing, and then, next page, writing, penciling, drawing. I think a lot of times in the beginning of 24-hour comics, you see stuff that's very ambitious, things that are very time consuming. And by the end of one of my 24-hour comics started off ambitious. The last 5 pages were hand turkeys. Let's see what the last 5 pages of OK's book are like. It's still dope as hell. I love it. This guy just throwing his yo-yo and eating food with his magic yo-yo. I love it. This is such a cool treasure. I have multiple copies of this. I don't have on my site, but if you ever see me in person, if you come to a meetup, you can reach out and be like, hey, can you bring one of those? Because I actually published a couple hundred of these, and I still have like 50 left. But the Magic Yo-Yo by OK Riscana. Thank you so much, OK, for sharing this with me. Let's keep moving on to another yo-yo comic I did called Yo, which is the true story about how I learned how to yo-yo, how I got into yo-yoing. Now, Yo was printed on a risograph machine. It's just 8 pages, and it is an old style accordion fold. And if you're interested in this, I'm actually going to make a separate tutorial video on how you can make comics like this. This is a really fun skill. If you're an adult, this is a fun way to share like birthday cards, like make birthday cards or instructions, tutorials on how to do things. If you're a kid, this is a fun way to kind of like journal your day. These are really fun. So I'm going to make a separate video on how to make this style book. Stay tuned for that. And finally, let's talk about Pedro's Yo-Yos. This is a children's book, a young adult book that tells the history of Pedro Flores, his move to America, and the creation of the modern yo-yo. When I say the modern yo-yo, I mean the first yo-yo that could sleep. It's a really fun way of telling the story of the modern yo-yo, but also if you're just kind of like into the story of like immigrants in America and Filipino immigrants who came to the West Coast, this is a really cool story because it talks a lot about that kind of experience. It's a really cool story, so check this out. And as part of this, I'm actually going to show you an interview I did with Carl Angel. Today I'm talking to Carl Angel, a very talented illustrator and designer of several books, including Pedro's Yo-Yos, which was written by Rob Peñas and has fantastic illustrations by Carl. It tells the story of how a Filipino immigrant became an innovator in the world of toys and changed the world of yo-yoing forever. Carl, thank you so much for joining us. I love this book.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I would like to know about you, and why don't you tell us about how you got involved in this book too?
Well, I got the job just by virtue of how an illustrator usually gets work. I was sent the manuscript by Lee and Lowe, and I was game. I didn't really even know that it was particularly a Filipino who was responsible sort of for the innovation of the yo-yo, or at least bring it to the U.S. in terms of its popularity. I was just enamored and just sort of impressed by something like that has incredible lasting power, and that Pinoy was behind it.
In this house, we stand Pedro Flores. He was a stylish dude. Every time I see photos of him, he was always just decked out in like these sharp, spiky shoulders, big tie, huge lapels, probably looks of the time, I would assume. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like drawing Pedro and the research you had to do for that?
That was interesting because I had gotten the job actually back in, I think maybe even 2016. In doing the research back then, there was only 2 pieces of reference that I could find. They were portraits of him, and one was a slim guy, and then the other one was another guy who had a fair amount of weight on him, and they didn't look anything alike, but they were both him. The thing that these images did have, though, was that the guy was sharply dressed. So, I mean, I knew that was a thing going in. There's the photo reference, which I base everything on, but when I'm drawing that story, now it's my character in a way, and just in terms of depiction. I would just reference the landscape of the time and just essentially just pull my imagination together and piece it all and kind of imagine what it would be like for him at that time and see how much I could convey that through painting. I think it carried through.
The yo-yo existed for a long time. It's been around in all sorts of cultures. Pedro took the toy that just went up and down, and he created the slipstring system that enabled it to sleep at the bottom of the string. So like before that, yo-yos were, just up and down, right? The way we kind of think of yo-yos now is all about the sleeping tricks and how long can you get it to sleep. And
now that's something almost new to me, because even that's not really necessarily in the book. I mean, they said that he did these tricks. I wasn't sure whether he was responsible for them or not.
but you did a really good job, I think, of depicting the way people yo-yo. And I think you're still kind of taking liberties with it and just kind of like having fun camera angles and interesting layouts as your primary thing and not really realism. But the thing that I wanted to say is you definitely got the finger right. The biggest pet peeve for yo-yoers, I think, is when the yo-yo string is like on their pointer finger here, or, you know, but you've got it on the middle finger and usually right in the right spot. So shout out to you for doing your research. I wanted to know, how do you as an illustrator do research when you're drawing something like this?
I got a still image, so I got to try and convey that sort of dynamic quality. When I was looking at the images, it looked like I was looking at kung fu stills or something like that, because people were just like this and they're like this, you know, and I mean, it was so dynamic. That's taking liberties. That's to make sure that, you know, that like just to kind of get the energy of just the movement of this toy. I think people may underestimate the importance of the yo-yo. There's people that are just very, very passionate about this sort of thing, and I think that's the sort of thing that I would like to see, you know, in another book. You know, I mean, of how much more widespread that passion became, and how he reflected on it.
I have a Patreon for these videos, and I asked if any of my supporters had any questions for you. And Brandon Wilson asked, where's the best place to buy a physical copy of this book? And is there an option to be able to get an autographed copy?
I guess the best physical place would be whatever your local brick and mortar is. I mean, I think most of them carry them. I mean, I know where I'm at in LA, there are stores that carry them. And if they don't, I'm sure they'd be willing to order it for you. I mean, I think bookstores still do that, where, I mean, especially if somebody shows interest in a book and, wow, you want a book, we will order it for you. That seems to be the general kind of consensus. Autographed copies, I wouldn't know how to do it unless you were to send it to me, and I would happily inscribe it for you.
And if people want to find out more about you and what you're working on, what's a good place to send them?
carlangel.com. That's my site. I actually haven't uploaded the work from Pedro's Yo-Yos yet, but it's got my other books up there too. And that's where all my latest goings-ons are.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Carl. I really appreciate it. And one more time, Pedro's Yo-Yos, fantastic book for anyone, yo-yo collectors or children, or just people interested in American history. I think this is a really great book. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Doc. Thanks, everybody.
And you know, I said at the end of this video, I was going to tell you about my book, The Little Book of Yo-Yo. A new book created in the last few years by me during a 24-hour comic book day, written and drawn entirely in 24 consecutive hours. It is a tutorial. It is really good for beginners. If you are a player already and you're just looking for something funny and unique, this is a really cool book for you. So this book comes with a transaxle yo-yo. It's a really good beginner yo-yo. It's a really fun yo-yo. It comes in a nice little bag. Check this out on my site, drpopular.com. Pick up your copy of The Little Book of Yo-Yo. The Little Book of Yo-Yo. Stop it. And that's it for this episode of PopCast. Thanks again for watching, and thanks to Carl Angel for sharing his time. You can check out Carl's book, Pedro Yo-Yos, at your library or in your local bookstore. And you can also pick up The Little Book of Yo-Yo, which I talked about. You can pick this up from drpopular.com, or you can pick it up from yoyoexpert.com, has some copies. Even local comic shops in San Francisco, like Silver Sprocket, has them. So you might be able to pick them up if you live in San Francisco. Otherwise, drpopular.com.